The wind tore through the pine trees like a warning. It was mid-January, and the mountain was wrapped in white silence, every path buried under thick snowdrifts. Inside a weathered log cabin at the forest's edge, 72-year-old Walter Harris stirred awake. His mornings were always the same: add wood to the stove, boil water, and brace against the cold. Walter had lived alone for more than a decade. Since his wife passed, the cabin was his refuge and his cage all at once. He split wood for warmth, trekked into town only when supplies ran low, and spoke more often to the wind than to people. Loneliness had become his companion. That morning, though, something felt wrong. The fire had nearly died, and the air inside was sharp. Walter pulled on his coat and boots, stepped onto the porch, and drew in a deep, frozen breath. That's when he heard it: faint, quivering whimpers carried through the storm. He frowned. No neighbor owned a dog nearby, and wild animals rarely sounded like that. Peering towards the tree line, he spotted 3 dark shapes against the snow. At first, he thought they were wolves, but when their heads lifted, his heart lurched. German shepherds. They staggered through the drift's ribs, faintly visible beneath ice-crusted fur. Their ears twitched, tails, low eyes pleading. One collapsed into the snow, lifting a paw gingerly before sinking. Walter's throat tightened. These weren't strays wandering for scraps. They were survivors. Gripping the railing, he muttered, "Lord, what on earth?" and trudged into the snow. The dogs lifted their heads but showed no aggression. Instead, they wagged weakly as if begging him to understand. Kneeling beside the nearest one, Walter brushed frost from its muzzle. The shepherd pressed its head into his palm, shivering violently. Behind them, paw prints stretched deep into the forest, long trails that told of a desperate journey. Walter looked back at his cabin. His pantry was stocked just enough for one old man. Taking in 3 half-frozen dogs would mean rationing every crumb. But when one nudged his hand with a cold nose, eyes filled with trust, he sighed. "I can't leave you out here." Guiding them inside, Walter opened the door wide. At first, the dogs hesitated, paws hovering at the threshold. Then, sensing his kindness, they stepped in one by one, collapsing onto the rug near the stove. The cabin filled with the smell of wet fur and the faint sound of tails tapping. That afternoon, Walter shared scraps of bread broth and dried meat. The dogs ate slowly, exhaustion in every bite. For the first time in days, their shivering eased. When his neighbor dropped by later and saw the shepherds by the fire, he shook his head. "You don't know where they came from, Walter. Could be dangerous." Walter glanced at the dogs, already dozing, paws twitching in sleep. Dangerous? No. They're survivors. Over the next days, Walter tended to them. He wrapped their paws in old rags, melted snow for drinking water, and watched as strength returned. But details troubled him. These weren't ordinary strays. Each wore a battered collar engraved with faint letters and numbers. One bore a scar across his shoulder. Another flinched at loud noises, snapping instantly into rigid focus. These were working dogs, police, or military. One morning, Walter noticed fresh paw prints leading away from the cabin. Following them, he found broken branches, blood in the snow, and half-buried tire tracks. His stomach twisted. These shepherds hadn't stumbled onto his porch by chance. They had escaped something dark. On the 4th day, the crunch of tires pulled him to the porch. A police SUV rolled up the narrow path, lights flashing faintly. An officer stepped out, bundled in a heavy coat, his eyes widening when he spotted the dogs peering from the doorway. "Thank God," the officer breathed. "We've been searching for them." The dogs' tails, wagging weakly, pressed close to Walter, as if unwilling to leave his side. The officer explained they were part of a K-9 unit tracking a suspect in the mountains when a deadly blizzard struck. Their handler had gone missing, presumed trapped or worse. Somehow, the dogs had trekked miles through the storm to Walter's cabin. Walter's chest tightened. They hadn't just fought to survive. They had carried their mission with them, seeking help when no one else could. The officer knelt, stroking their frost-bitten fur. "They never stopped searching," he whispered, "even when the storm tried to kill them." News of the discovery spread quickly. Newspapers praised Walter, calling him a hero. He shook his head. "I only did what anyone should." But people couldn't stop talking about the image of an old man opening his cabin to 3 K-9s when no one else was there. The Shepherds were treated for frostbite and exhaustion. When reunited with their unit, they often looked back toward Walter, eyes soft with recognition, as if remembering who had pulled them back from death's edge. Walter's once quiet cabin soon buzzed with visitors, reporters, neighbors, strangers who wanted to thank him. But the legacy for Walter was quieter. He had been living in silence for years, certain his life's chapters were done. Then 3 dogs arrived, and in saving them, he discovered something he had been missing: purpose. In time, the police invited Walter to attend a ceremony honoring the Shepherds. Their names, Ace, Bravo, and Scout, were read aloud, followed by his. A medal was pinned to his coat. Cameras flashed, but Walter kept his eyes on the dogs. They were the true heroes. As months passed, Walter still chopped wood and tended his stove, but life was no longer empty. Visitors dropped by more often. Letters arrived from strangers thanking him for his compassion. And on rare occasions, the K-9 unit brought the Shepherds back to his cabin. Each time they bounded inside, as if no time had passed, curling by the fire they once nearly died beside. Walter would sit in his old armchair, sipping tea, listening to the crackle of flames and the steady breathing of the dogs. The silence of winter no longer felt heavy. It felt alive. And whenever people asked why he opened his door that morning, he answered the same: because loyalty deserves to be answered. They didn't give up on their mission, so how could I give up on them? The story of Walter and the 3 Shepherds spread far beyond the mountains. For many, it was a reminder that survival is rarely about strength alone. It's about loyalty, compassion, and the courage to act even when the cost feels heavy. For Walter, it was simpler. In his heart, he believed the storm hadn't delivered the dogs by accident. They were meant to find him, and he was meant to find them. That winter, an old man discovered he was not as alone as he thought. And 3 German Shepherds, scarred but unbroken, reminded the world that heroes come in many forms, sometimes with wagging tails and frost on their fur. The story of Walter and the 3 German Shepherds carries timeless lessons about compassion, resilience, and the power of loyalty. Walter could have turned away, convincing himself that survival in the harsh winter left no room for extra mouths to feed. Instead, he opened his door, sharing the little he had with creatures on the brink of collapse. His choice teaches us that true kindness is not measured by abundance, but by willingness to give even when it requires sacrifice. The dogs themselves also offer a profound message. Despite exhaustion and pain, they pressed forward through the storm, not only to survive, but to seek help and continue their mission. Their loyalty and determination remind us that perseverance can carry us further than we think possible, even when the odds are stacked against us. Applied to daily life, the story calls us to look beyond ourselves, to recognize moments when others, human or animal, need us to step forward. It shows us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet act of opening a door, sharing warmth, or simply choosing not to give up. In doing so, we not only save others, but also rediscover meaning within ourselves.